Yes. All right.
Ready?
All right. Welcome, everyone. It is so amazing to be here. I am really excited to have Jessica Howard here today for this really special event. My name is Jessica Kishpaugh, for those of you who don't know me. Oh, we're getting feedback again. Well, crap. I don't know how we're going to fix that. Oh, I think it went away. Or I think we're good. I think we're good. All right. So let me kind of restart there. My name is Jessica Kishpaugh. I live in New Jersey. I'm a holistic nutritionist and a mind-body eating coach. And I love connecting and collaborating with other women, especially in the health field. So we have Jessica Howard here today, and she is an orthopedic physical therapist and also a specialization in pelvic floor health. This is a very special and important topic. Yeah, we're getting the feedback again. Shoot. I don't know why. Maybe once I mute myself, then it will be okay. I'll kind of go back here. All right. So we're covering all of the topics that women really should be educated with when it comes to women's health and pelvic floor health. I know that personally, I had my own journey when I had my first child, when it came to being cleared by a doctor after 6 weeks and saying, hey, you can go and exercise. And then I went out for like a run/walk. I would say jog/walk, and just totally ripped my abs. So I ended up in pelvic floor physical therapy and never knew what that was. So we don't know what we don't know. This is a really important topic. And I'm going to turn it over to Jess, and I'm going to mute myself because I definitely hear an echo and I don't want to be disruptive. So let us know if you still hear an echo once we mute myself. I'm going to spotlight you, Jess. You can take it away from here. And we do have, by the way, we do have time for questions and answers at the end. I also just have people who submitted questions prior to this. So I will get those to you as well, like when we do Q&A.
Okay, my name is Jess Howard. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad you guys are all here. I have about 12 years experience. I'm a physical therapist. Orthopedics was my original passion. But over the last 6 years, I've been really inspired by this whole women's health, pelvic floor movement, and I've really fully integrated it into my practice. So what I wanted to run through with you guys is what that looks like. What do we treat? What does treatment look like? Is it right for you? I got into it really through personal means. I went through fertility treatments. I went through pregnancies. I went through miscarriages. But the postpartum phase really reiterated to me how important it is that we are tailoring treatment specific to women, because it should be. It's different. We're going through a different thing than everybody else. So what I want to reiterate to you all is this is here, it's available, and it's probably something that you could use. So if you're wondering, is this really for me? Do I really need this? Like, spoiler alert, statistically speaking, yes. But let me run you through some basic common conditions that we treat. So number one, I think the most common people think of with pelvic floor and pelvic health is pregnancy and postpartum. Yes, we do that. So we treat a lot of pregnant women. We treat their aches and pains during that journey. We kind of prepare them for that birth too, so that labor can be they can be more prepared for labor. And then of course we do the postpartum phase. We treat if you have any, separation of the abdominal muscles, that diastasis recti, we treat that. Any incontinence issues post-delivery, those are super common. So there's multiple kinds of incontinence. If you're think incontinence, think leaking, but there's reasons for it. There's different forms of it. So if you're going every 20 minutes and then you don't quite make it to the bathroom time, that's incontinence. If you jump on that trampoline with your kids and you leak a little bit, that's incontinence. All of these are things that could be helped in physical therapy. There's also things like constipation. Yes, physical therapy treats constipation. I know, crazy, right? Like nobody thinks that that's even in our realm, but it is. And I cannot tell you how successful this patient population is. We have so many patients that come in with constipation. They have no idea that this is something that they can do. So that's another realm. We'll get into what treatment looks like, but I just want to give you a sense of who are we treating? Constipation, incontinence. We're getting moms back into exercise, just like Jess was talking about. If you're not sure, when is it safe? I know there's just that like standard cookie cutter 6 weeks, but everybody's different. So part of why we're here too is to give you an assessment and see what's specific to you. How can we help you? What are your goals? And respond. How are you responding to this? Okay, let's tweak that just specifically for you. Another one that we treat a lot is another thing that people don't talk about is pain with sex. This could all be totally related. One of the major ones we see is pain with penetration. These go hand in hand. All of these things could be coming from the same thing. And there's a lot we can do about it. The other thing that we see a lot is pelvic pain with chronic conditions. So a lot of people come in and they think they have urinary tract infections, and it's really not. They're getting negative cultures from the urologist. Sometimes that's a pelvic floor condition. So if you have endometriosis or interstitial cystitis and you have pain with that, there might be something we could do about that in the physical therapy realm. So those are some of the common things. There's a lot more, but those are the ones you're going to hear a lot about and the ones that are most prevalent. What do we do about it? So like I said, every patient is getting a very specifically tailored program to them. So there is no cookie cutter response to that. So I was going to give you an example and then show you what we did with this specific patient. So I had a patient that actually just graduated very successfully. She came to me with a long history, like years of constipation, years of pain with sex, and some more recent stress incontinence. So that's your sneeze, cough, whatever. She had a little leaking with that sort of thing. So those are 3 things we see come in. Those 3 travel together a lot. And then you also, the back pain too. So back pain is another big one that you tend to see with these conditions. So the reason we see those 3 all the time, so you're looking at, again, stress incontinence, that's leaking under stress, leaking when you're jumping, coughing, sneezing, pain with sex, usually penetration, and constipation. So we're going to go through the anatomy a little bit with the treatment, but your pelvic floor does a couple of things. It's really the hammock that holds in your pelvic organs, and it's also your last bit of control as urine and bowel exits the body, but it's also control on things entering the body. So when that pelvic floor is in this super tight contracted position, it can't, if you're already holding a contraction, you cannot create a very successful contraction from a contracted position, if that makes sense. So if you try to create a powerful contraction in your bicep here, it's really hard. You need to be able to lengthen and relax that bicep to create a good, powerful contraction. Same thing's true with the pelvic floor. So if the pelvic floor is holding this overly tight contracted position, which we see a lot in these women that are leaking urine, they have pain down there. So then they sit like this. And then our women under a lot of stress, yes, they are. Here you go. Now we're holding our pelvic floor like this, and it doesn't have the lengthening capacity to create a good contraction. So it's not letting anything in or out comfortably anyway. And then it's not successfully keeping your urine in either. So we'll get into what that really looks like to help that piece. But we see that a lot. So the first thing we'll do to try to lengthen and relax that pelvic floor is look at your breathing. It sounds so simple, but it's huge. So that pelvic floor we just talked about, it sits in this kind of parallel position with your diaphragm. So when you breathe in, that diaphragm moves down. That causes an inspiration. You breathe in, that moves down. What that's going to do is compress the contents of your abdomen. That compression should cause a 3-dimensional expansion. 3-dimensional, so your belly should expand. You should even feel it into your back and your ribs. When you push down there too, that pelvic floor should get some lengthening, some nice lengthening and relaxation of the pelvic floor moving downward. Now, what we're trying to avoid is this holding here and you're just breathing here, right? What we want to see is this pistoning movement. That pistoning movement, we call it taking your pelvic floor for a walk. It's baseline pelvic health. Take that pelvic floor for a walk, let it move through its range, just like every other joint needs to. If you had your arm in a sling for a week, it would be very sore, very uncomfortable, and it would not work very well. Same thing is true when your pelvic floor is doing this. So this is step 1, getting that pistoning movement back. Number 1 gets the pelvic floor moving. Number 2 It's also massaging the contents of your intestines down towards the exit. It's a really big part of GI motility. So you need that to move the contents down and out. So number 3, it's a great stress relief. There's so much research. I know you've all seen it about the benefits of diaphragmatic breathing, meditation, that sort of thing. It's a moment to focus on your breathing and not your to-do list. And that can be very effective in and of itself. The other thing we go through that we're going to go through with this woman that we did with her treatment was lifestyle review. Are you moving every day? What are you eating? What's your fiber intake? Are you getting enough? Are you getting enough water? All those sorts of things. We'll also likely go through a diet or a diet diary. Are there irritants? Are you having bladder irritants? Now, everybody hears, okay, I can't drink caffeine or wine if I have urinary issues or bowel issues, but it's really not the same for everybody. So sometimes I take people through and we go through exactly what they ate and drank all day, what their urinary, what their urination, their bowel movements look like. And that can be a really big eye opener to some specific issues to you. Now, some other things we do are really basic, just some stretches. Now that pelvic floor literally connects directly into some of the rotators of your hip. So we're going to do a lot of mobility work into those hips. Your standard pure forma stretches, you guys probably know those, even some yoga type moves like down dog and child's pose, cat cow, all that kind of stuff to get the spine moving, get the hips moving. Anything really wide knee, like into a deep squat position, is going to put that pelvic floor into a nice stretch. And then you add on to your breathing and you can really take that pelvic floor, lengthen it, and let it do its thing. So plenty of stretches. Those are really basic, really simple. We go through a lot of those. And then to help you, there's a lot of manual therapy that we can do as well. So there's some mobilizations that I can get in and really mobilize those hip joints, mobilize the back, mobilize the sacrum, that sort of thing. And then some soft tissue work. A lot of these patients have really, not just the pelvic floor is doing this, but the musculature around the abdominal muscles, the back muscles, the hip muscles on the exterior are all super tight and contracted and irritated. So releasing those can be a big part of what we do. Now these pelvic floor muscles are something we can treat directly too. We can release them. We can release them just like any other muscle. That can be very effective. I will show you too, there's some manual techniques I can do, but there's also some things you can do at home, and I will show you that at the end. We tend to, in physical therapy, take a really big, broad view because nothing exists in isolation. So a lot of times my runners, my moms that are coming back and they want to get back to running, we have to look from the ground up. How's your foot striking the floor when you're running? Are you running with a heavy heel strike? What's your footwear look like? Are your knees caving in? All this kind of stuff. Well, we look from the ground up because all of that force that comes through your foot up through the legs is going to reverberate to that pelvic floor. So we want to take care of it from the ground up and make sure that that pelvic floor is not getting extra stress. Finally, once we get that all in place, we're looking at posture and everything as well. Then we can look at activating the pelvic floor. I know everybody's heard about the Kegel, but the most important part of the Kegel is that you're relaxing the pelvic floor so that it can then be contracted. So we will then, on top of all of that, strengthen everything, including the pelvic floor, so you have the control you need. If everybody would like, can we do, unless, Jess, do you want to do some questions first, or should I show you some techniques?
I would say do some techniques. Let's do like a little interaction here. Okay.
So number one, I was getting this feedback. I did this panel with a bunch of healthcare providers, and everybody knew what belly breathing was and diaphragmatic breathing was. And I said, well, what does it look like? And nobody knew what it looked like. So super basic, but let's look at that first. So if you lay on your back and you put a hand on your chest and one on your belly, when you breathe in, your belly should rise first. If not first, it should not rise after the chest. What I see is a lot of people, they're doing, it's a lot of this chest breathing. What that does is the diaphragm isn't actually working there and isn't doing this up and down motion that it should be doing. So belly breathing is really when you are inhaling through your nose. I have people exhale through like a pursed lip because that keeps that inhalation longer. It's easier to feel it. So if you put your one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, you should feel that belly doing more movement than the chest. That's your basic rule of thumb. That's when you're going to get that kind of pistoning movement we talked about. So that's a really easy one to do. It's easiest to do on your back because your other muscles aren't active. It's going to be most relaxed there. The other thing, can I stand up for this? You guys can see? Yeah. Okay. Another thing I'm going to show you is a really simple massage of your GI. So what we're going to do is you are going to you're basically moving the contents of your lower intestine through the ascending, transverse, and descending colon, okay? Looks super simple, but I cannot tell you how effective this can be, so I hope you're near a bathroom. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna pull up on the right side. So you're gonna start with that hip bone on the right side, and you're gonna pull up towards your ribs. Just as simple as that. Doesn't have to be very hard, but you're pulling up on your ribs. Again, easier, I would definitely do this laying down, because then your abs are less active. But you do want to get in there maybe an inch or so, and you're going to pull up on the right side. And then you're going to pull across from right to left. And then you push down. Seems simple, but you're really helping that motility of the GI. It can be a very effective manual thing, especially if you're watching if we're going through your diet, you get your diet on track, you get your movement on track, you get your hydration on track, you're doing your breathing, boom, this one can really be a huge adjunct. The other one I wanted to show you is a release. So I talked about how I can manually release the pelvic floor. This is a way that you can try to do it yourself. So you're going to find a chair and you're going to sit on this ball. Now, the biggest thing that you need to find is you have a bone in your butt area. I call it the sit bone. It's your ischial tuberosity. And what you're going to try to do is find that, sit down, feel that bone underneath your hand. You're going to lean over and get that ball just inside that sit bone. Does that make sense? So you should feel, sometimes you feel like kind of a burny tight sensation. That means you're probably hitting a muscle that needs it. So it should be, you have these two bones you sit on the chair. The ball should sit just inside.
Do we gotta zoom in on your tush and see? No.
What do you mean to do? Here. So what you're doing again, just to review, you're going to sit down, take your left hand and feel for that bony point that comes into contact with the chair. Okay. Find that. You're going to take the ball and put it just inside, just on the inside of that sit bone. And then you're going to get your weight back onto the ball as much as you can tolerate. It should feel like a sore tight muscle. The more sore the area is, the more you want to work on that area. Do your diaphragmatic, your belly breathing in that spot, and that can do a lot to do a little bit of like a self-release of that muscle group. Sound good? Anybody have any questions?
I'll pop over some questions that we have submitted and then questions that came through on Instagram as well. So I have a question from Julia, and she says, what could help with random pelvic pain that feels like cramps on steroids? So I guess that would be severe cramps after having had a hysterectomy 3 years ago.
So that could be, if it's lower pelvic area, that very well could be cramping, spasming of the pelvic floor. Whenever you change that, so the pelvic floor is intended to hold up all those organs. Whenever you start taking those organs out, I've seen a lot of patients the system has to kind of reacclimate. It doesn't have that same pressure system now that it did, now that that organ is missing. So it could just be the pelvic floor more in kind of a spasm, just like any other muscle would be. So she very well could benefit from these relaxation exercises to deactivate the pelvic floor. So I think if she started with some of the stretches, the self-release, especially the breathing in that child's pose, that kind of stuff could be a really big help to start.
Amazing. I have sort of a multi-question from Andrea. And maybe one is more of like a situation, and maybe you can like speak to the situation. And then the second is actually pretty similar to our question from Jess on Instagram. So the first part of her question was, I made appointments with pelvic floor PT staff to learn and do pelvic exercises to help with bladder control. On my first appointment, they wanted to conduct a pelvic floor muscle exam, which I wasn't told I would have to do an internal exam in a PT setting with strangers. And they wouldn't explain why I couldn't refuse the exam and just learn helpful pelvic strengthening exercises. So while there's no question there, I think my question, or my reading between the line question, is, how often do you do internal exams? What, is that helpful? Is this a normal situation? And then I'll kind of go to her second part of the question as well.
I think it's a really great question. I think a lot of people are very apprehensive about that piece, even if they're aware of that piece. So yes, these muscles are, you can access them internally. So that's, for women, you're accessing it through the vagina. Now, there are practices that do internal work and there are practices that don't do internal work. I'm a practice that does not do internal work. I'm not set up for it. There's a lot we can do without that assessment. There's a lot we can do without that form of treatment. And when patients need it, I send them to those very highly specialized clinics to do just that. Now, the idea is, so it's a set of muscles, and the best way to feel it is to access them through the vagina. You can feel the muscles on either side, whether they're overly tight or that sort of thing. You can get a sense of how, when you do a contraction, is it a strong contraction? Are you creating a strong enough contraction to hold your urine, for example? So it is very normal practice. It was very normal that they were asking her to do that form of assessment. But I know that a lot of people are really apprehensive and feel very weird about doing that. And I think that's one of the benefits of, even when I was doing internal work, I would save it. I wouldn't do it the first session, because there's a lot of education that has to go on. There's so much that we can do that you don't need to start with that. So the way I practice is, if you need it, you need it, but there's so much we can try before we go there.
And it's interesting, just from a personal standpoint, as I said, I'm very passionate about this topic because I went through it with my kids postpartum and had no idea pelvic floor physical therapy was a thing. And this is why it's so prevalent. So for me, like I said, I felt like I ripped my abs just going on like a walk jog. But turns out, once we were doing some of the core work, both manual, like you said, musculature around the abdominum, and then some of the exercises that were also, pelvic floor related, and also some based in a little bit of Pilates and yoga. As you said, there's definitely some stretches and exercises that were really helpful. We then did internal work, and turns out I have scar tissue, or had scar tissue from giving birth. So if you've had a vaginal birth, you often have no idea what's happening internally, or what is left over internally, and what's really going on in there, unless you get in there. And so that was something that we actually ended up working on, because there were tight muscles that needed to sort of be released, and there was scar tissue that needed to be massaged, basically, disintegrate the scar tissue, because it was still painful. So, sometimes, it may feel a little bit strange or uncomfortable. And sometimes, maybe we just have to rip the Band-Aid off and do what needs to be done. But if you do have someone who specializes and is knowledgeable about internal, I can tell you, just from a personal standpoint, it was extremely, extremely helpful. Of course, in a private setting, right? You don't want to be in a big public setting, right? That should be in a private setting. It should be someone who knows what they're doing internally. But really good question. Second part of Andrea's question is, why don't OBGYNs discuss the condition of the pelvic floor, right? She says, when I sought help, I didn't get help. Is it mandatory? Oh, so this is the second part of her question. Is it mandatory to know if your pelvic floor is tight or loose before you can do exercises to improve bladder control? So those are two totally different questions. Feel free to answer as you wish.
Two good questions. So I think that the OBGYNs are definitely getting up to date with the research. Even 5 years ago, it was a different story. So now I'm hearing OBGYNs, especially midwives tend to be really in tune with this sort of thing, are recommending this so much more frequently than they were. And because the research is there, there's so much research about this, and it's so beneficial for so many women that now the medical community is catching up to something we all knew was helpful, and now the research is totally supporting everything we're doing. So OBGYN is getting on track. It's much less common nowadays. I mean, even when I started this 6 years ago, I had to go in and I was educating a lot of the OBGYNs, like, this is the research, look what we can do, you know? And now it's really rare that I have to go in and reiterate that with a provider because they know. So if you have a provider that's saying, no, you don't need this, now maybe that might be specific to their case, or it might be something that the provider is saying, you're just not ready to exercise yet. I've seen that. Like, I've had some patients come to me and they want to start therapy right away, and they're like 3 weeks postpartum. I have had discussions with OBGYNs there and being like, we're not doing any exercise harder than they're doing at home, bending over and lifting their baby out of the crib. We want to prep them for that. We can start with the stretches and the breathing and the awareness of what's going on with their body. So there's so much we can do even before that 6-week mark, but we always talk to the OBGYN or midwife before that. But that could be part of maybe what that situation was. And then the second part was, what was the second part again?
The second
tighter
part,
loose. Yes. So,
yes.
Number one, what I never want to impart to anybody is to be afraid of movement. If you should always move within what feels good to your body, always. So one thing I think too is the 6-week you cannot be out and walking. Think about all the physical things you are doing with that newborn. Anything under that level, you got to go for it. And I think it's prepping you if you're moving and you're stretching and you're breathing. I'm not talking about going out and, you know, lifting 50 pounds. I'm talking about moving your body in ways that feel good. Now, is it important? Yes and no. So yes, no, in the sense that you are not going to hurt yourself by doing the basic level stuff that we just went over today, by getting in tune with your breathing, feeling that, making sure that those things are moving properly, making sure you're breathing and your belly's expanding, making sure that that pelvic floor knows how to relax and then recoil, stretching, getting mobility into your spine and into your hips. Really, that stuff is not going to hurt anything. So no matter which way you are, that's all safe. Where you do get into issue, what I see is people know the Kegel. And what I've seen in my practice is patients come to me that I've been doing Kegels, it's not working. And the thing is, their pelvic floor is already so tight, and they're doing the tightening part and they're not doing the relaxing part. That's the biggest thing that I see with the error, and it's not their fault. It's just, you know, we're all being inundated with information, right? And that one sticks, the Kegel. So if you have an overactive pelvic floor and you're just tightening on top of it, yes, that may not be helpful. You're not going to hurt yourself. You're not going to cause any damage, but it might not be helpful for your condition. The relaxing part, that's why every single patient, no matter whether it's tight, loose, whatever, if that's not even an issue, and when I mean loose, I don't mean loose. Really, we talk like weak. It's not going to be loose. People, oh, it's loose in there. It's not loose in there. You're all good. It's all working. You're doing great. It's just about the muscle being able to contract and relax. That's what it's about. So the bottom line is, if it feels good to you, do it. The contraction without the relaxing, yes, that could be ineffective for someone that already has an overactive pelvic floor. Make sense?
Absolutely. How do you treat bladder incontinence, bladder control?
So that same things we talked about today, I always start with the breathing, because then I can give more education about the anatomy, what that looks like, what it should look like, what it should feel like. It matters too. Are we talking about urge incontinence, or are we talking about stress incontinence? Urge incontinence sometimes, so if you have somebody that's going every 20 minutes, and then they're leaking if they don't make it in time, that you're looking, sometimes those urge incontinence issues, you're going 20 minutes every 30 minutes, that can be more of a neurological loop. It might just be that you have fallen into a habit. A lot of times you see that with pregnancy. Now, I also don't want everyone to think, oh, pelvic floor is only for pregnant and postpartum people. That is so not the case. I know that's been a lot of our examples today. but I have so many women and men, by the way, another discussion, but that are in here for pelvic floor therapy that has nothing to do with pregnancy related stuff. Sidebar. Okay. So with the incontinence, if you're going every 20 minutes, it may not be a weakness issue in the pelvic floor. It might be that your system, when you were pregnant, you were going every 20 to 30 minutes because your bladder only had this much space to expand, never got out of that habit, never got out of the habit that, oh, when I'm only this expanded, I need to pee. You need to retrain your body that it can get to this level before you have to pee. Your bladder can get to this level before it can pee. And sometimes that's as simple as this diary we talked about is listing every time you urinate, giving you the techniques to try to strengthen that area for sure, but try to, okay, push that out. See if you can you do 15 minutes? Okay, can we push it to 20 minutes? It could just be a neurological thing that we need to reset. So that is there are different treatments for different types of incontinence. The other one, the stress incontinence, and there can be a combo, by the way, that can exist together. If you're sneezing and you're leaking, yes, that's most likely more of a weakness thing. And it is. We do a lot of that specific activation of the pelvic floor. We talk about lengthening it, and then we talk about contracting it. We definitely do that. But even probably more important, I like to go through that because I like patients to have an awareness of what's going on. Okay, they can contract when they need to, they can relax when they need to. I think that control and awareness is important. But you can strengthen your pelvic floor by strengthening your core and your hip muscles. A lot of times people don't even need the Kegel. If you're out there and you're doing squats and split squats and side steps and you're doing a basic lower body program and you're hitting the core. Now, when I say core too, core means abs, back, diaphragm, pelvic floor. It's a cylinder. It's not just a one, that's not just core. I'm not just talking about six pack here. If you're hitting those, you are strengthening your pelvic floor. These things fire together. So you may not even need the Kegels. I do go through them because I think that awareness is important.
I think that's really a great point, that you can strengthen your pelvic floor by strengthening your core, both front and back. And I can again tell you personal experience. I have 3 children. So this happened to me and my first child. Each consecutive pregnancy, I stayed strong in my core and made it really important to stay strong in my core during those pregnancies, and had a much easier, better recovery postpartum, and didn't have the diastasis that I had, which was the problem in the first place with my first child. So absolutely, I 100% agree. We have questions coming in all over. So Michelle has a question. What if you're in your mid-50s and you are 20 years post-childbirth? Is it too late to work on improving your pelvic floor function?
Absolutely not. We see that all the time. I have a patient in her 70s now, never felt like she could mention to anybody, even her providers, that she was leaking, that she was having some incontinence. We did 2 sessions, and she came in the door and she was like, what happened? Like, how have I been doing this my whole life? Like, it doesn't matter. It absolutely, we see it all the time. It does not matter how long it's been. There may be something we can do about it.
Dr. Leah Flaherty says, would you recommend progressive muscle relaxation for stress incontinence?
Dr. Leah. So yes, usually. So like we said, if your muscles are, specifically your pelvic floor, but if your muscles are maintaining a contracted position and they're not allowed and they're not being taken through their lengthened state, they're not going to contract very well. So anything you can do, it sounds counterintuitive. People are like, what do you mean I'm trying to relax my pelvic floor? I feel like I'm supposed to be tightening it. You need to be able to take your muscle to its lengthened state in order to contract it. It's not going to contract well if it's stuck here. So yes, it's a good place to start. Great place to start.
Awesome. Erin says, I have a tight left side of my pelvic floor, professionally diagnosed. It flares up, particularly when I do heavy lower body weightlifting. Should I stop doing heavy lifting and or lower the weights and do higher reps? Will I ever be able to lift heavy again? I'm thinking the breathing piece to release that left side of my pelvic floor will be what I need to be doing to address the overactivity.
These are some great questions. Yes. So I don't think you should be thinking about stopping heavy lifting in general, but you may need to scale back the weight just a little bit temporarily. And if you incorporate some of these things, or you get seen, you get assessed, and you get some more specifics to your specific case. But if you scale back the weight a little bit, find that threshold where you can do all your lifting, but you're not getting the leaking, is a good place to scale back to, and then add in some of these other things like the breathing. You can do this, the release with the ball. If you have no pain there, you may not need to do that. If that feels like I'm just sitting on a ball, I don't feel any tenderness, don't feel like you have to do that. If you need that, you will feel it. You will feel like, oh, wow, that feels really uncomfortable or really tight or like almost like a burny sensation. You may need it. If you're doing that and you're like, I don't know, you might not need it. So I would definitely get into your breathing, get into your stretches. If you aren't doing any specific pelvic floor contractions, I would get into that. Now, just as a pointer there, if you are doing pelvic floor contractions and you're not sure if you're doing it right, two things I tell patients. Number one, the visualization of the one that I think connects most with people is if you imagine that you had a tampon in and someone was trying to pull it out. When you do that contraction, you should feel like that is pulling that tampon back up and in. That's the sensation that you should have. That's what you should visualize. Someone's trying to pull out your tampon for some reason, and you are pulling it back up and inside your body. Another way you could test this is once you go to the bathroom, use the restroom, insert one finger into your vagina. What you should feel this way, what you should feel when you tighten, when you do a Kegel, when you tighten your pelvic floor, you should feel a gentle squeezing of the finger this way and up. There should be like a gentle squeeze and upward motion. That's what a pelvic floor contraction should feel like to your finger. That's what we're looking at as providers. Is that what that feels like? Squeeze and up. Also, just as important, when you're still sitting on that toilet, relax and release, and you should feel it go the opposite way, right? So up and in, and relax. Okay, it's subtle. You're not gonna, it's a subtle sensation, but that's what it should feel like. So I really believe it. I know there's some providers that are like, forget the Kegel. I believe in the Kegel. I still believe that learning how to contract your pelvic floor is important. The awareness of the patient is important. If you get into some of that and the breathing, the stretching, that may be enough to get you back up to ramping up your weight again.
Lisa has a question. What are suggestions for the pelvic floor seeming to be loose and having structures coming through at time?
Meaning, so I think I hear a lot of women say like, oh, I had kids, I'm like loose now. First of all, you're not. Like the pelvic, it's not this like perfectly cylindrical canal. You're talking about this kind of opening, and your pelvic floor is this muscular kind of door, right? So you're not loose in the sense that it's just like perfect cylinder and it's tight or loose. It doesn't really work like that. But the pelvic floor can be weak, and that might be what you're feeling. So the pelvic floor, the weakness there can be treated with what we just talked about. So making sure you're being able to relax it and lengthen it, and then some isolated specific strengthening and activation of the pelvic floor, along with, your ab exercises, your hip exercises, lower body. Now, the other thing that I want to mention with the lower body strength training, make sure you're breathing through that too, because especially if you have weakness in the pelvic floor or you have that abdominal separation, if you're not taking control of the pressure in there, a lot of people, they exert themselves and then they're holding their breath when they exert themselves. That's going to cause a lot of excess abdominal pressure, and now your abs and your pelvic floor now have to fight this. They're fighting everything else already, and now they have to fight this excess pressure. So make sure you're breathing. One of our slogans is like, blow when you go. That's like that's more for like having a bowel movement. But if you're doing something and you're exerting yourself, like your baseline reaction to that should be like, blow it out. When in doubt, blow it out.
Amazing. Is incomplete urine evacuation related to pelvic floor muscles?
It very well could be. That's something that I would definitely have a urologist or assess that, but it very well could be a pelvic floor condition. Yeah.
Can you speak to diastasis or diastasis recti?
Sure. So brief overview is during pregnancy, all women have our abs separate. They have to. So by abs separating doesn't mean that anything went wrong. It just means they're supposed to separate. And then the postpartum phase, they are supposed to come back together. But there are things that we can do to ensure that that happens, or maximize its likelihood of happening and speed up the process. So literally to make space, the abs have to do that. So one of the things that we do is the breathing, and then we talk about the pelvic floor contraction. But I do a lot of like deep layers. So your abs have a number of layers to them. That deep layer is the one that you really want to engage, and that's going to help kind of close the gap. So that's doing some breathing, exhaling, always exhaling on the contraction. There's a lot you can do there. Kind of like we talked about the breathing, you can do an abdominal contraction as you exhale. What I'll do with patients, sometimes I'll have them put like a ball on their lap, and as they exhale, they push into a ball almost like as a bit of resistance, push it into their leg, and their abs should contract almost like a resisted crunch, but you're not lifting up off the table. Their abs should contract there. You should feel them. And what you want to look for is when I'm contracting my abs, are my abs coming together, or are they further separating and creating a doming? If it's doming, you don't want to keep doing that thing. There's been some more research that says lately doming is fine. In general, while you're retraining your body, I would try to avoid the doming, especially if you're not doing it under, you're not getting any oversight with a professional. Generally, if you're getting like doming and separation when you're doing something, and you do something else a different way and it kind of closes, do those and not those. Does that make sense?
On a basic level, Jess, you know, for those who don't know what a diastasis is, or if they have one, how does one know that you have one? And, you know, what can you do at home? Or like when do you know if you should be going to PT?
Okay, so if you lay on your back and you do that same setup as when you're doing your breathing, you lay on your back with your knees bent, feet flat. All you're gonna do is lift your head. That's it. You're gonna put your hands, you can't see me. You're gonna put your hands like on your stomach here, and you're gonna lift your head. What you want to try to look for is you have a line, not really a visible line. Well, sometimes postpartum, but you have a line right down the center that's gonna go through your belly button, right down to your pubic bone. So get your hands there. And what you want to see is when I lift my head, try to dig your fingers into that line here and see, is there a separation there? Or do I feel, you know, is there like, when you lift your head, your muscles are going to have to contract. So sometimes I have patients that, you know, their muscles are here to here. We're talking about like 2 to 3 fingers I can fit in between the muscles on either side. If you're just getting like a finger or less in there, you're fine. If you're getting a finger or 2 in there, you might want to get assessed. You're probably fine. There's probably nothing that you can't do, but it can be helpful to get guidance on how to ramp up whatever your goals are.
Awesome. We have another Jess who says, how do you think we can get doctors to get the word out to prenatal and postpartum women so it becomes an automatic referral?
In some countries it is. Some of it's insurance. I know. It's, I don't know if you guys all want me to get on the soapbox right now, but some of it's an insurance thing. Believe it or not, this is something, so we've been fighting with insurance companies for years on this, and it is getting better, but there's a reason so much of this care is done at a cash-based practices, because a lot of insurance doesn't pay for this, which, like I said, do not get me started. But I think that the more awareness that there is, I don't think, like I said, the providers, the OB/GYNs are catching up. I think like I said, most of the providers that I'm familiar with are on board. They are here. They're in it, and they're sending their patients. I would love to see it be an automatic assessment. You may not need it. Sometimes you may not need it at all. I would love to get women getting an automatic referral at 6 weeks, go get assessed by a pelvic floor physical therapist. Now, one of the hard things is access, like I said, because of the insurance. A lot of these providers are only doing cash because the insurance company isn't paying enough to have, like you said, in those structured facilities where it's just for pelvic floor, they're doing internal work, you're seeing 1 an hour. Insurance is not paying enough to do that. So there's very few of us. I take insurance for it, but there's very few of us that do. But I think a lot of times patients are also a little worried, oh, I'm going to be doing this for how many weeks, how many times a week for how many weeks. We'll work around you. I think if you get an assessment, you may be fine. You may not even need us. But if you do, there's a lot we can give you for home. There's a lot of education we can give you just so you have the awareness that you need to go forward in whatever it is you want to do.
Absolutely. All right. Instagram, are there any other questions? Pop them in the comments. I think I hit them all on IG. So pop any other questions that you might have in the comments. Anybody else who is in the Zoom room?
I think we covered a lot.
I think I got all of the
It was great. Thank you all for coming.
Anybody else sort of like last chance for questions? Comments,
I'm also here. I'll put my contact info in the comments too. So if people have any questions, I'm happy to get back to you at some point. If you don't want to ask it in this setting, I'm happy to get back to you at some point. So I'll make sure that my contact information is up there for people.
Amazing. Amazing. I will also put your contact info out to all the places where this was live streamed, so that if you do have questions for Jess Howard, feel free to reach out. Oh, we have another question. Haley says, will these practices work even 11 years postpartum? I think she answered that, but yeah.
100%. Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, you know, you could be years and years and years down the line and not realize, like, maybe you had a diastasis, or maybe you have a weak core, maybe you have a weak pelvic floor, maybe, you know, sometimes we just normalize. We normalize a lot as women. I think we normalize stress. We normalize mommyhood. We normalize our pelvic floor issues. We think that if we jump up and down and pee our pants, it's normal. It's not normal. Like, there are things you can do
very common,
for yourself
fixable,
to help you. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said very common, normal in the sense that it's very common, but it's not something you have to live with if you don't want to.
Exactly. Exactly. And so again, I'm glad that you recognize, like, this is not just about pregnancy, postpartum. It's, you know, and this is why this was so important to put out here today, because, and please guys, you know, if you come across the replay, share it with your friends and family. I highly encourage you guys to just spread. This is how, and this kind of answers Jess's question on Instagram with, like, you know, how do you help, you know, get doctors and OBGYNs on board? Like, spread the word, like, spread the awareness of what is pelvic floor health, why should women, you know, seek pelvic floor health, and why this is such an important topic. You know, like I said, 7 years ago, I had no idea this existed. And I know I'm not the only person that has happened to. So I'm sure you can help a friend, you can help a family member, you can help a stranger, you know, just by sharing this information, sharing this live, sharing the recording, you know, send it to a family member. If you're in a women's group, if you're in a mom's group, if you're, you know, in a book club, whatever it is, it's such an important topic. Pelvic floor therapists are everywhere now. You know, you can find them wherever you are located. You know, we live in New Jersey, Jess and I, but they are everywhere. And, you know, you can get the help that you deserve to have, you know, simply by seeking out the help and spreading the word of awareness. So, Jessica, thank you so much for coming and joining us and speaking about this really important topic. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
All right, everyone. We will get your information out to all of the people for any other questions. But in the meantime, guys, thanks for tuning in on all of the paces, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.